Hi, guys. Today I want to give you a little background into the attack on Pearl Harbor. We've all heard the day that will live in. Hi, guys. How many of you have heard December the 7th, 1941, a day that will live in infamy? That was Franklin Roosevelt's famous quote. We all know about the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7th, and we're going to dig into that. But today I want to give you a little background information as to how this happened. It wasn't like the Japanese said on December 6th, hey, I'm bored. Let's go check, out Pearl Harbor and bomb their ships. This planning went on for a year and a half. So let's back up a little bit. Up until about 1850, Japan is what we would consider to be a primitive nation. Not really, but that's what you would consider it because they had done a lot of modernization. Yes, when you had the shoguns and the different emperors, and you studied all that. But getting back to the end of the 19th century and the early 20th century, Japan realizes they've got to keep up with the rest of the world. They're going to have to modernize if they're going to not A, be taken over and conquered, and B, if they're going to become a wealthy, prosperous nation. In 1904, Russia and Japan get into a war because if you look at a map, Russia went all the way past through Asia. So there were some ports there along the coast of Asia that Japan wanted and Russia wanted, and they got into a war. And everybody in Russia thought, well, this will be 20 minutes and done because, little bitty Japan, island nation, big old us, Russia. Wrong. And 1 year later, Russia is having defeat after defeat after defeat. You can't really say Japan won because they signed a treaty, but Japan came out on top of that treaty and pretty much won. Let me give you a parallel comparison. That would be like us, the United States, going to war with, say, I don't know, Luxembourg and losing. Okay. Russia was a major world power with millions and millions of people. This actually became the beginning of the end for the last czar of Russia. The people are like, you can't beat Japan. What are you worth? Little did they know how strong Japan was becoming. 1904, not only was that when the war began, this is when Admiral, see if I can say this right, Isoroku Yamamoto graduated from Japan's Naval Academy, and he's going to be a major player and a catalyst here in the Pearl Harbor. 1905, Japan wins that war. Next 20 years, Japan is on the march. In 1910, they annex Korea. Now, where have we heard that? Oh, yeah, Germany annexed Austria. Well, this is much, much worse. There was no vote. Korea did not vote for Japan to take them. In fact, when Japan took them, they went, okay, Korea, you're done. We're getting rid of all your culture. You are forbidden to speak Korean. They cut down most of the trees in Korea and planted trees that were indigenous to Japan. People in Korea are like, I don't even know where I am. This doesn't even look like Korea. So this was a horrible situation for the people of Korea, and the world went, oh, well, that's a darn shame. Okay, didn't do anything. So Japan's getting stronger and stronger and stronger. In 1931, they invade Manchuria, and they do it brutally. So we're going to talk a little bit about where their brutality stems from, why it was that way. 1937, they're like, Manchuria was pretty easy. Let's keep going, and they march further into Asia. And this is when the rape of Nanking happens. This is an area, a big city in Asia, in China. They murdered 300,000 people, not soldiers, y'all. There was not even a defense of this city to speak of. This is women, children, men, old, young. Those of you who were on our live session on Tuesday saw some of the pictures from that and saw how horrific it was. The murdering of children, the raping of women, the murdering of men, the burning of cities, the burning down houses. I mean, it was horrible. And the world went, oh, this is not good. And America went, this really isn't good because we're supplying about 80% of their oil. They're buying 80% of their oil from us and a large percentage of the iron and steel. And we're like, you better behave or we are not going to be trading with you. So this gets worse and worse. They keep invading. By 1940, Japan invades what was then French Indochina. Back when there were a lot of colonies. Don't you just love colonies? I know that I'm not from there, and I know that's your land, but not anymore. It's mine. That's pretty much what colonization was. So that French Indochina would be modern day Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. And Japan went, yeah, I'll take that. And they're murdering the people. They're treating them with brutality. But is that the only reason why we're upset at them? No, no, no. They're getting all those resources. And we're concerned, and the world's concerned, where are they going to stop? And meanwhile, over in Europe, Hitler's knocking down countries and doing the same thing. So America's really concerned. And we went, yeah, we're done with you. We'll talk about how they stopped trading with them. And then, of course, 1941, Japan attack on Pearl Harbor. So that's kind of your timeline. So let's talk a little bit more about what Japan was like then. They had an emperor. They thought of their emperor as a god. They never saw the emperor. They never heard him speak because they thought they would die. After all, he's a god. If you hear a god speak, you're going to die. The emperor did not have control like Hitler had control. He was surrounded by a kind of a tribunal of military leaders that, told him what to do pretty much in a certain diplomatic way. They never thought, they quit thinking of themselves as an isolated nation, island nation. They wanted to become a world power. They were still living by the Bushido Code. You can see here, the Bushido Code taught that war was purifying and death was your duty, and that death was much better than dishonor. And the thing you could do to dishonor yourself the fastest was to ever surrender. So if you surrendered, you had no honor and you were worse than a dog. So how do you think this worked out for American POWs and Allied POWs when their commanders, not realizing this is the way Japan was going to act, said, it's 100-1, we're going to get slaughtered. The honorable thing to do here is to surrender. It's not great, but it's better than all my men being slaughtered. And then the Japanese pretty much slaughtered them anyway. It's a pretty tough time. Of course, they're ultra nationalists like the Germans. They think their race is far superior to any other race, including any other Asian race. And because of that, they have an entitlement attitude. Well, I am so much better than you, so yeah, I'm going to take your land because after all, I'm better than you. That can pose a lot of problems. Moving forward, if this would go forward, disintegrating relationship between Japan and the U.S. As I told you before, Japan relied on us for about 80% of their oil and a large percentage of iron and steel. When they marched into Manchuria, we went, It got worse and worse. 1940, we cut way back on what we let go into there. Didn't slow them down too much. July 1941, 5 months before Pearl Harbor, the U.S. says, that's it. We're freezing all your assets. So basically what that means, a lot of Japanese businesses had a lot of money tied up in the United States in oil refineries, steel manufacturing, iron refineries, that kind of thing. And a lot of Japanese people had businesses here and had all their money in American banks in the United States that, frozen. In other words, you can't touch it. Yes, I know it's your money, but you can't withdraw it. Hate it for you. Now, was that well deserved? Absolutely. Absolutely it was, because the behavior of Japan and what they were doing. But as you can imagine, this did not sit well. Now, a lot of people will tell you, and they're ridiculous, that this incident 5 months before Pearl Harbor is what caused Pearl Harbor. No, you don't plan a Pearl Harbor attack in 5 months. In fact, back in 1940, Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto was told to come up with a plan that would decimate the American Navy, not because they wanted to sail into San Francisco. They weren't interested in doing that. They wanted to stop America from stopping them. And they kind of looked at Americans as fat, lazy, and afraid because we were such isolationists. A lot of people made that mistake thinking that about Americans. Yamamoto was not one of them. He actually said, this is a mistake. He actually worked in the United States for the Japanese government for a while. He knew what America was really like. And he said, this is a huge mistake. But when he got outvoted, he threw himself into it. And it took him a year and a half to plan the Pearl Harbor attack. And it was a beautiful plan, executed wonderfully. He was brilliant. But how about this? The day after, not even the day after, several hours later, when all the planes have flown back to the aircraft carriers that have now bombed out Pearl Harbor, and they're turned around and headed back to Japan, you can imagine the celebrating going in on the ship. And Yamamoto's just sitting there. And someone said to him, Admiral, why aren't you celebrating? And I don't want to get this wrong. Here's what he said. I fear all we have done is to awaken a sleeping giant and fill him with a terrible resolve. No truer words ever spoken. That's exactly what happened. In fact, the next day, December 8th, a Monday morning, hundreds of thousands of American young men were lined up for miles to sign up for the Navy and the Army to go defeat Japan. Totally miscalculated the United States. They thought we'd go, oh, I'm so sorry, Japan, don't hurt us. We'll give you oil. We'll give you resources. Wrong. That is not what we were going to do. So that's what brought on the anger. Is This is all leading up because their resources are gone. I think we talked about this. The attack was considered especially heinous or awful for two reasons. One, this is one that really gets my goat. There were peace negotiations going on in Washington, D.C. right now between Japan and the United States. The Japanese ambassador to the United States on December the 7th was meeting with our ambassador, with our guy, trying to come up with supposedly a peaceful process to where we could get back into trade relations. Him knowing full well we're about to get attacked. And they're putting on this act like, oh, yeah, we want to have peace negotiations. So that's the ultimate betrayal. Secondly, they did not declare war. It was an unprovoked attack. We had done nothing to them. We had not attacked anything with them. And so that's why FDR called it a day which will live in infamy. So that was a really bad day for America. Japan thought it was a really great day for Japan, but it turned out to be a really bad day for Japan because they ended up paying the ultimate price. Close to 3 million Japanese soldiers died, and civilians died because of World War II. We lost a total of 400,000 people. Not that that's not a lot, but it's certainly not 400,000, which is what they had lost. So ultimately, they paid the price for that. Moving on, Pearl Harbor by the numbers. 2,335 servicemen are killed, an additional 1,178 were injured, and 68 civilians killed. So that's a total of what, 2,403. 6 ships were totally destroyed. We're never going to be able to repair, including 2 battleships, and then another 13 were badly damaged. 169 Navy and Army Air Force planes are destroyed. So let me talk about this. So the thinking was at Pearl Harbor, we have all these planes and they're all parked on the runways unless you're doing maneuvers or practicing or whatever. So the thinking was, there's a lot of Japanese people here living in Hawaii and a lot of them are spies and saboteurs. We were really afraid they were going to, put a bomb under a plane or sabotage the planes. So the smart thinking was park the planes nose to nose and nose to nose, making a diamond, 4 planes, groups of 4 planes, okay, all over the runway. Well, it worked great to keep saboteurs from doing anything because you could see everything. However, what do you think this diamond-shaped thing looked like from the sky? A beautiful target. It was so easy to knock out 4 planes at one time. Horrible. So 169 ships are destroyed. Fortunately, none of our aircraft carriers were at Pearl Harbor that day. They were all out in the Pacific on maneuvers. Here's an interesting story. So Admiral Halsey, who's one of my favorite admirals, graduated from the United States Naval Academy in 1905, about the same time as Yamamoto. Smart, smart man. He's coming back from having maneuvers. When I say maneuvers, they're like practicing and doing drills, and this is what we do if we ever went to war, that kind of thing. He is scheduled to come back to Pearl Harbor on December 6th. Thankfully, there was a huge storm where he was in the Pacific. And so we had him slow the ship down, way down, and radio in, we won't be getting back until the 7th. Well, he got back late in the afternoon on the 7th. Can you imagine? Now, he heard on the radio that Japan had, decimated Pearl Harbor, but your mind cannot imagine that kind of devastation. Imagine if you'd never seen a picture from 9/11, you've never seen a video, nothing. And I said, yeah, 2 planes flew into buildings and they burned down. And then you saw the video footage. Wouldn't that be 1,000 times worse than what your imagination could have come up with? Same thing. Halsey and all those guys come in, they see these huge plumes of smoke coming up. And they're like, what can this be? It's like something out of a nightmare. Never has that kind of devastation ever been seen before. So the good news is 3 of our aircraft carriers that were stationed at Pearl Harbor were not there. And that's probably what saved us and allowed us to win the war, because conventional thinking was the most important ship in battle was a battleship. There's those great big ships that, send those bombs, miles and miles offshore. What we came to find out was the most important ship in a battle is an aircraft carrier, because you're literally able to transport bombers and fighters anywhere in the world you want to go. And we're very fortunate those were saved. Now, I want to read you a story, some good news about Pearl Harbor. So I want you to imagine you're the commander, you're the CO of the entire Pearl Harbor base, okay? This is a big, big job. This is a big, important admiral. Husband Kimball was his name, Admiral Kimball. Great guy. But do you remember that letter with Dwight Eisenhower we talked about where he took responsibility if D-Day did not succeed? Well, guess who got all the blame for Pearl Harbor? The leader, Admiral Kimball. So he is relieved of command almost immediately. And now some other people got to be put in command. And the person who was chosen to be in command of the Pacific Fleet, that's a huge job in the Navy. You have to be a really cool admiral to do that, was Chester Nimitz. Okay, also a Naval Academy graduate. So here's the story. On Sunday, December the 7th, 1941, as Pearl Harbor is being bombed, Admiral Chester Nimitz was attending a concert in Washington, D.C. He was paged and told there was a phone call for him. When he answered the phone, it was President Roosevelt. He told Admiral Nimitz that he would now be commander of the Pacific Fleet. Admiral Nimitz flew to Hawaii to assume command of the Pacific Fleet. He landed at Pearl Harbor on Christmas Eve, 1941. As you can imagine, there was such a spirit of despair, dejection, and defeat. You would have thought that the Japanese had already won the war. The next day, Christmas Day, 1941, Admiral Nimitz was given a boat tour of the destruction wrought on Pearl Harbor by the Japanese. Big sunken battleships and Navy vessels cluttered the waters everywhere they looked. As the tour boat returned to dock, the young helmsman of the boat asked, "Well, Admiral, what do you think after seeing all this destruction?" Admiral Nimitz's reply shocked everyone within the sound of his voice. Admiral Nimitz said the Japanese made the three of the biggest mistakes an attack force could ever make, or God was taking care of America. Which do you think it was? Shocked and surprised, the young helmsman asked, "What do you mean by saying the Japanese made a big mistake?" Here's what he said. Mistake number one. The Japanese attacked on a Sunday morning. 9 out of every 10 crewmen of those ships were ashore on leave. If those same ships had been lured to sea and been sunk, we would have lost 38,000 men, not 3,800. He's counting the injured and the dead there. Mistake number two. When the Japanese saw all those battleships lined in a row, they got so carried away sinking those battleships, they never once bombed our dry docks opposite those ships. If they had destroyed our dry docks, we would have had to tow every one of those ships back to America to be repaired. As it is now, the ships are in shallow water and can be raised. Well, all but the Arizona. One tug can pull them over to the dry docks and we can have them repaired and at sea by the time it would have taken us to get them to America. And I already have crews ashore anxious to man those ships. Mistake number three. Every drop of fuel in the Pacific theater of war is on top of the ground storage tanks 5 miles away over that hill. One attack plane could have strafed those tanks and destroyed our entire fuel supply. That's why I say the Japanese made three of the biggest mistakes an attack force could make, or God was taking care of America. I love that story. And here's a picture of those storage tanks, those fuel tanks on December 8th. And he's right. All it would have taken was to tip bullet holes in those. They would have started leaking fuel everywhere. Not only would the fuel have been gone, can you imagine the cleanup, the disaster that that would have caused, all that fuel? So that's kind of the story behind the story of Pearl Harbor. You now have an assignment you're going to do that's going to dig a little deeper into Pearl Harbor, but I hope this has given you some great background information, and I hope you've enjoyed this talk. Thanks so much, guys.